I still remember the drive out to that farm in rural Kentucky, though I have tried for years to forget it. The road was nothing more than cracked asphalt cutting across rolling fields and broken fence posts. Most nights out there feel lonely, but that night felt stripped of life, as if every living thing had stepped aside before I arrived. The call from the farmer had come just after dusk. His voice had been tight with fear, the kind of shaking panic a man tries to swallow but cannot. He kept saying one thing over and over again. You need to get here right now. Something wrong is out here. Something is watching the cattle. By the time I turned into the long gravel driveway, the twilight had faded and the land was sitting under a washed-out blue glow. There were no insects humming, no dogs barking, not a single cricket. The silence hit me the moment I stepped out of the cruiser. Felt like stepping into a vacuum. No breeze, no sound, no motion. I had been a sheriff long enough to know that silence like that is not natural. It is something you feel in your ribs, something that presses at the inside of your ears, something you do not trust. The farmhouse sat dark except for a single lantern on the porch. The farmer stood under it, hands trembling around the handle. He was an older man, built solid from years of labor, but fear had carved deep lines into his face. The lantern glow wavered across his features as he whispered my name, as if afraid the night itself would overhear. He did not even greet me. He pointed toward the pasture with a shaking arm. I followed his hand, and that was when I saw them. The cattle. Dozens of them. Not grazing. Not lying down. Not wandering. They were standing in a perfect circle. Shoulder to shoulder. Heads pointed inward. Completely still. I have worked enough ranch cases to know that livestock move on their own terms. They bunch up. They roam. They scatter. But they do not do that. They do not form shapes. They do not stand frozen like figures carved from stone. And they certainly do not face inward as if waiting for something in the center that I could not see. The farmer whispered, I did not move them. They did it on their own. All at once. All at the same time. His voice cracked. He sounded ashamed, like he already knew how unbelievable he sounded. I walked closer, my boots sinking into damp soil. My flashlight beam cut over the cattle. Every pair of eyes reflected back at me. Not one blinked. Not one flinched at the light. They were breathing, but even their breaths were synchronized, rising and falling in one slow rhythm. Then I realized something else. Their ears. Every ear was tilted forward, facing the center of the circle, as if listening to something I could not hear. A cold feeling crawled up my spine. I turned back to the farmer and asked him what he saw before he called me. He took a shaky breath. I saw it on the barn roof. Wings folded against its back. Legs bent the wrong way. And eyes. Red eyes staring down at the herd like it was choosing something. I wanted to dismiss it right there on the spot. Blame whiskey or exhaustion or shadows. But I could not ignore what was in front of me. The silence. The circle. The immobility. The synchronized breathing. Something had happened here. Something the land itself seemed terrified to speak about. The farmer gripped his lantern tighter and leaned closer. I swear to you, Sheriff. Perched right there on the ridge of the roof. I saw it clear as the moon. Tall. Dark. Wings wrapped around itself like a cloak. And when it lifted its head, every animal froze. His voice caught on the word froze. Like he knew the memory too well. I looked back at the cattle. The stillness was so complete it felt staged, like a painting meant to unsettle the viewer. Even the shadows seemed wrong, stretching slightly inward as if the center of the circle pulled at the light. The farmer stepped beside me. I have lived on this land 40 years. I have seen coyotes. I have seen bobcats. I have seen things I could not explain. But nothing ever made the animals do this. The lantern flickered once, as if the flame inside felt the same pressure I did. I asked him again where he saw the figure. He pointed toward the barn. A long red building with paint peeling off its siding and a metal roof dented from years of storms. Its silhouette cut through the moonlight like a jagged tooth. The moment I looked at it, the silence grew thicker, heavier, as if the air was waiting for something. The farmer swallowed hard and whispered, "Please tell me you hear it too." I told him I heard nothing. That was the problem. Nothing is not what nature makes. Nothing is what something else leaves behind. I took a step toward the barn and felt the ground pulse once under my boot. Faint vibration, almost imagined, and yet I felt it, like a distant tremor or a heartbeat beneath the soil. When I turned back to the cattle, every head was still pointed inward. Every eye fixed on an empty patch of dirt as if something invisible stood there. Something I could not see. Something they could. A cold wind finally moved through the grass, but it carried no sound. Only a strange shiver that passed through the animals in one smooth wave. Their hides rippled. Their breath hitched. But they did not break formation. The farmer whispered behind me, "Sheriff, tell me this is something you can explain." I wanted to tell him yes. I wanted to tell him anything. Instead, I stood there with my flashlight, staring into a silence that felt older than both of us. Older than the barn, older than the farm itself. And somewhere deep inside that quiet, I felt watched. Not by the farmer. Not by the cattle. Not even by something hiding in the woods. Watched from above. I did not want to look up. My instinct screamed not to. But the silence pressed harder and harder, as if urging me to face what he had seen. When I finally lifted my eyes toward the roof of the barn, the moonlight felt cold on my face, and the quiet deepened into something almost alive. I walked toward the barn with my flashlight pointed low, cutting a narrow beam across the dirt. I did not want to point it at the roof yet. Something in me was not ready. The farmer followed a step behind, gripping that lantern like it was the last warm thing in the world. The cattle remained behind us, still arranged in that circle that made no sense, still staring into the empty center as if waiting for something to return. Each step toward the barn felt heavier than the last. The silence did not break, thickened. My boots made no sound on the ground. The farmer's breathing was the only noise, shallow and shaking, and even that seemed swallowed by the air before it traveled more than a few feet. I stopped at the barn door. My hand hovered over the metal handle, cold from the night air. The farmer whispered, "Do you feel it, Sheriff, the weight of it?" I did not answer, because yes, I felt it. A pressure that had settled over the land like a held breath. A stillness that did not belong in any place where things lived. The handle gave way with a creak of old hinges. The lantern light spilled across the dusty interior. Empty stalls, stacks of feed, tools hanging on hooks. Nothing unusual, but the quiet inside was worse than outside. It pressed so close it felt like a physical presence. The farmer stayed in the doorway, as if crossing that threshold meant something he was not prepared to face again. I stepped further inside and scanned the rafters with my flashlight. That was when I saw them. Marks, long shallow grooves etched into the supporting beams, like something heavy had clung there. Not claw marks exactly, more like pressure marks from weight, like talons had gripped the wood without piercing it. I pointed up. "Did you do that?" The farmer shook his head. "Never saw those until tonight." The lantern flickered and dimmed. Not because of the wind. There was no wind. It dimmed the way a flame does when all the air in a room is being pulled in a different direction. As if something invisible had drawn the heat toward the rafters. I felt a throb behind my ear. A faint pulse of discomfort. The kind I get before a lightning strike hits close during a storm. The hair on my arms rose even though the air felt still. The farmer whispered from behind me. I saw its eyes up there, red as dying coals. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back it was gone. Just gone. I swallowed once and forced myself to step out of the barn and face the roof. The moonlight lay across the metal panels like cold silver. My flashlight beam slid over the curve of the roof. First I saw nothing. Then something glinted. A long diagonal scrape, shallow but unmistakable. Something had dragged across the metal. Not a branch. Not an animal paw. Something heavier. I whispered to myself, "What were you?" And the answer was silence. The farmer stepped up beside me, trembling. "Sheriff, I know how this sounds, but that thing on my roof was not a bird. It was tall. Too tall. With wings wrapped around itself like a cloak. And when it looked at me, it felt like it was already inside my head." He paused and rubbed his fingertips across his brow. The cattle stopped moving the moment it looked down at them, like it pushed something into the air. I remembered how still they had been when I arrived. Not frightened, not agitated, frozen, concentrated, focused on something no longer there, something still echoing in their minds. My flashlight went dim for a moment. Not dead, just weaker. The beam flickered. The battery had been fresh at the start of my shift. There was no reason for it to fade. That was when I noticed the cornfield across the pasture. The stalks were tall enough to sway in a light breeze, but they were not moving. Not a single leaf. The whole field looked painted in place. The silence pressed harder. I asked the farmer, "How long did you watch it before it disappeared?" He wiped his palms on his jeans, trying to steady himself. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. He stared at the cattle first, then at me. Then it leaned forward on those wings like it was listening to something far away. And then it was gone. The cattle did that right after. Formed up all at once. No sound, no fuss, just moved like they had been waiting for it. He pointed toward the silo near the far edge of the property. The motion was small, almost hesitant. I followed his gesture and saw more scratches on the silo's metal surface. 3 wide streaks catching the moonlight. Not deep, but long enough for me to imagine the length of the creature's reach. I felt watched again. Not from the barn. Not from the silo. Not from the woods. From above. I lifted my head slowly. The sky was clear except for a few thin clouds, pale and drifting. The stars looked faint, like the night had been drained of color. The moon hung full and bright, casting long shadows across the fields. Something moved behind the clouds. Or maybe the clouds moved around something. It was subtle. A ripple of shadow. A distortion. For a moment I thought my eyes were adjusting. Then the shape slid away too quickly to be a trick of the light. I whispered, "Did you see that?" The farmer stepped closer to me, lantern trembling. "See what, Sheriff?" I stared at the sky long enough to feel foolish. Long enough to question if fear was playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew the answer. The same answer the farmer already feared. Something was out there. Something that wanted to be seen by some and not by others. Something that had moved across his roof without leaving a sound. Something that had frozen a herd of animals with its presence. When I turned back toward the cattle, the circle had not broken. Not a single animal had moved. Not a single ear twitched. Not a single breath came out of sync. And the silence felt like a hand around my throat. Something had happened here before I arrived. Something was still happening. And whatever had perched on that roof had not gone far. The farmer whispered, "Sheriff, is it still here?" I did not answer. I simply kept staring at the still circle of cattle, feeling the quiet press harder and harder, as if the land was waiting for the moment when I realized the truth. Something was watching us, and it wanted us to know. The deeper I moved into that silence, the more I felt a weight settle behind my ribs. A steady pressure, like someone standing close enough to breathe behind my ear. The cattle remained frozen in their circle, eyes fixed inward, as if guarding or fearing something invisible in the center. Every instinct I had was telling me to back away from that formation, but something else pulled me forward. The farmer stayed close to me, lantern trembling. He kept looking toward the barn roof as if expecting the creature to return in the same sudden way it had vanished. He whispered, "Sheriff, something is wrong with the air. Feels tight, like the whole place is holding its breath." He was right. The air felt thick and unmoving, not cold and not warm, just unnatural, like it had weight. I walked a slow circle around the cattle, examining the ground. No hoof marks out of place. No signs of disturbance. They had not wandered together. They had not been herded. They had moved with intention, a shared intention, and that was what frightened me most. Animals do not agree on anything. They do not organize. They do not choose patterns, unless something else chooses for them. I knelt near the center of the circle. The soil there was smooth, almost polished. No footprints, no marks, nothing, as if something had hovered there, or stood without touching the earth. The farmer whispered behind me, "It was standing there, Sheriff, right in the middle." Before the cattle moved, I could feel the pressure, like it was bending the air around itself. I stood and aimed my flashlight toward the far edge of the property, where the cornfield brushed against the dark line of the woods. Every stalk stood still as stone. The silence felt like a presence. Then something glinted on the ground between the barn and the circle of cattle. A feather. At least I thought it was a feather at first glance. But as I approached, I realized it was not soft or delicate. It had a strange texture, almost like thin metallic threads woven together. It caught the moonlight in a way that made the veins glow faintly. I reached down and touched it with the tip of my glove. It was warm. The farmer stepped closer. "What is that?" I did not know. It was too large to be from any bird in the region. Too heavy. Too rigid. But the strangest thing was the faint hum I felt through my glove, like a tiny vibration pulsing inside the feather. The silence pressed tighter. Suddenly the lantern flickered, its flame struggling for air. The farmer gasped and held it steady. The flame bent sideways, not from wind but as if pulled by something unseen. I straightened and scanned the roof of the barn again. Nothing. I scanned the sky, clear except for a few pale clouds drifting past the moon. I turned toward the woods. The entire tree line seemed darker than it should have been. Not because of shadows, but because there was an absence of something. Like the trees had absorbed the light or the night had thickened only in that place. Then I heard it. A faint metallic hum. Not from the feather. From above. I lifted my flashlight toward the peak of the barn roof. The beam flickered once, twice, then steadied. A shadow moved. It slid across the roofline in one smooth motion, barely touching the metal. It was tall, dark, wings folded close to its body. It paused just long enough for me to see the outline clearly. My breath stopped in my chest. The farmer whispered a curse under his breath. He clutched the lantern as if it might shield him from what we both knew we were seeing. The figure stood at the edge of the roof, wings tucked, head tilted slightly downward. Two faint points of red glowed where the eyes should be. Not bright, not glowing like fire, more like embers that had been smothered but refused to die. The hum grew louder, faint, but vibrating through the metal roof like a distant engine. My flashlight dimmed again. Then the creature unfolded its wings. Slowly, carefully, like a curtain of darkness slipping open. The wings were huge, stretching wider than the barn's roof. The tips brushed the metal, producing a faint ringing that crawled through my teeth. I felt the air pressure change. The silence deepened. My ears popped as if the atmosphere around us had shifted. The cattle moved. Not much, not a step, but every head lifted at the exact same moment. Every eye shifted from the center of the circle to the creature standing on the roof. The farmer grabbed my arm. "Sheriff, do something." But what could I do? Shoot it, shout at it, command something that was not bound by the rules of anything I understood. Before I could react, the creature lifted one foot and stepped forward. The roof groaned under its weight. The metal bent slightly, but the creature was graceful, lifting itself with almost no sound. Then it leaned forward. The red eyes brightened, not violently, but with a slow pulse, like the glow of heated iron. The hum grew louder. My flashlight sputtered. The lantern flame bent toward the creature as if drawn by a current. The farmer whispered, "My God." And then, before either of us could move, the creature launched itself from the roof. Not with a flap, not with force. It simply glided downward with terrifying silence. Wings stretched wide, cutting through the air like a blade. Passed above us. The air trembled. My vision blurred for a heartbeat. Something cold brushed across my arm. Then it was gone, swallowed by the dark line of the woods. The silence collapsed behind it, leaving the night gasping for sound again. A distant thud echoed from the trees. Then nothing. The cattle broke formation all at once and began walking as if waking from a trance. The farmer stared into the woods, voice hollow. "Sheriff, what did we just see?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to say something that made sense. Instead, I found myself staring at the glowing ember in the dirt, the feather, and the faint metallic hum beneath my feet. I knew then that whatever had perched on that barn had not come by accident. It had come with purpose, and it had not finished with us. Long after the creature had vanished into the woods, the silence across the farm did not lift. It lingered in the fields and clung to the barn walls, heavy and stubborn, like a fog that refused to move on. The cattle wandered again, but none of them approached the center of the circle they had created earlier. They moved around it, each one stepping wide, as if the soil there still carried a presence they were unwilling to touch. I stood in the open pasture with my flashlight aimed toward the woods, waiting for something to break the quiet. A sound, a bird, a breeze, anything. But the land refused to breathe. Even the insects stayed hidden as if the creature had pressed its presence deep into the ground, leaving a memory that everything living still feared. The farmer approached slowly, lantern shaking in his hand. "Sheriff, nothing should be able to move like that. Nothing with wings that size should fly without noise. And those eyes, Lord help me, those eyes felt like they were burning through me." His voice cracked at the end. He was staring at the woods with the same dread I felt crawling through my veins. I told him to go inside the house and lock the doors. He hesitated, glancing at the cattle, then at the barn. "Sheriff, what about you?" I swallowed the knot building in my throat. "I will be fine. Go. Stay with your family." He squeezed the lantern handle tighter, then turned and hurried back toward the farmhouse, shoulders hunched, as if expecting something to swoop down on him at any second. When he reached the porch, he turned for a moment, watching me from a distance. His silhouette flickered under the warm lantern light. Then he stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The house went quiet, leaving me alone in the open field. The feather still lay near my boot, faintly glowing from within. The metallic hum was softer now but not gone. When I leaned down to pick it up, warmth pulsed through it like a heartbeat. I slipped it into an evidence bag, though the plastic crackled strangely around it, as if resisting contact. I turned toward the woods again. There was movement this time, a shift of darkness. Not a figure, not a shape, more like the shadow of something large passing silently between the trees. When I lifted my flashlight, the beam died entirely. I hit the button 3 times. Nothing. The battery had not drained. I could feel the power inside it, ready to burn. But the light refused to work. The moment I pointed it at the woods, it went dead. I lowered the flashlight and aimed it at the barn. It flickered back to life, weak but steady. I aimed it at the ground. Steady. I aimed it at the woods again. Dead. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. Something in those trees did not want to be seen. The moonlight broke through a patch of thin clouds, illuminating the edge of the woods. The tree trunks cast long shadows, but none of them were consistent. One shadow stretched too far. Another curled around a trunk the wrong way. They shifted as if something enormous moved silently above them. I took one cautious step forward, boots brushing the grass. The land felt colder near the woods, though the air temperature had not changed. It was the kind of cold that sinks through a coat, ignoring fabric and flesh. That was when I heard it. A breath, but not from a throat. More like the air itself exhaled. A long, low release that rustled the topmost leaves even though the lower branches remained still. The creature was close. I felt it before I saw anything. The same pressure as before. The same weight inside the silence. But this time there was something else. A faint vibration underfoot, like the earth resonated in response to the thing in the trees. It was not just the animals reacting. It was the land. I stepped back, slowly, trying not to trigger whatever was watching me, trying not to move too quickly. The sensation of being targeted crawled over my skin, like cold fingers tracing my spine. Farther down the field, the cattle stopped walking. Every head turned to the left at the same time. Not toward me, not toward the barn, toward the woods. They stared at a single point, a dark patch between 2 old trees, a place where the shadows were too thick. I lifted my flashlight again and aimed it directly at that patch of darkness, even though I knew it would die. The beam flickered once, twice, then collapsed. The woods grew darker. Then something stepped forward. Not fully. Not enough for me to see its shape. Just enough for me to see the red glimmer of its eyes. Not bright, not glowing, just there, deep, a pulse of color in the black. I felt my chest tighten. The eyes did not blink. They did not move. They watched. Not the herd. Not the barn. Me. The metallic hum returned suddenly, louder than before, vibrating through the air and making every hair on my arms stand straight. It grew in intensity until I felt it in my teeth, a distant ringing that made the world tilt slightly. The cattle stepped backward in unison. One step, then stillness. The eyes brightened for a moment, a brief flare of crimson. Then the creature stepped back into the shadows, wings spreading once more like a curtain of night. The hum snapped off. The silence collapsed with it. Wind rushed across the pasture, bending the grass in a wave. The cornfield rustled for the first time all night. The lantern on the porch flickered wild in the sudden breeze. But the cattle did not break their stare at the woods. Not until the shadows finally settled and the night grew truly dark again. Only then did normal silence return. Not the suffocating kind. Not the unnatural emptiness. The ordinary quiet of a rural farm at night. And somehow that felt more frightening than anything else. Because it meant the creature had chosen to leave. Not fled. Not retreated. Chosen. I took a shaky breath and whispered into the darkness. Why are you here? There was no answer. Not from the woods. Not from the barn. Not from the cattle returning to grazing. But deep inside me, I knew something had changed. The creature had not come to attack. It had not come to hunt. It had come to show me something. To warn me. Or to mark me. And whatever it wanted to reveal was not finished yet. I am older now. I sit in my office long after the deputies have gone home. The lights lowered, the door locked, and this recorder on the desk in front of me. I tell myself that speaking these words will loosen the weight I have carried for years. But even now I can feel the silence from that night lingering in the air around me, gathering in corners, waiting to be remembered. I never filed the real report about what happened on the farmer's property. What I submitted to the county was a trimmed-down account. Disturbed livestock. Unknown predator. No threat found. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. Nothing that would be printed in the paper or whispered about in town. The truth stayed locked inside me, exactly where I thought it belonged. But time has a way of chipping at the walls we build to hide what frightens us. And some nights, when the storms roll in from the valley and the sky goes dark, I hear something familiar in the wind. The silence. Not the natural kind. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy, hollow stillness that presses against the skin and makes the world feel paused. The same silence that settled over that farm the night the creature stood on the barn roof. For years afterward, little things kept happening across the valley. Cattle standing shoulder to shoulder with no sound. Horses refusing to leave their stalls. Dogs lying flat with their ears pointed toward the woods. The farmer called me again the following spring and said the animals had formed another circle, this time around the water trough. He told me he felt the pressure again. The same weight in the air. The same eerie quiet that tasted like danger. I went out there, and the moment I stepped onto his land, the world fell into that strange hush once more. But the creature did not show itself. Not fully. Not like before. I saw it only as a movement. A dark ripple passing across the tree line. A shift of shadow bending in a direction no wind could explain. The animals all turned their heads at the exact same moment, following something gliding through the woods with complete attention. When it passed, the silence collapsed again, just as it had on the first night. The farmer asked me if he should move his herd, sell his land, leave the valley. I told him no. Not because I believed he was safe, but because I no longer thought the creature wished him harm. Or anyone else, for that matter. What I felt that night was fear, yes, but not the kind that has fangs or claws. It was a deeper fear, a warning fear, a fear you feel before something happens, not during. That creature did not bring danger. Felt danger coming. It was not the threat. It was the sign. And I think that is what scared me the most. Some evenings I drive past that same field on patrol. The barn is still there, though the roof has been repaired. The marks are gone. The cattle graze normally now, but every once in a while, I see them freeze. Not for long, just a moment, as if listening to something far away, as if remembering. And when the moon rises behind the ridge, I catch myself looking at the roofline the way the farmer once did, expecting to see wings folded tight, expecting a slow unfurling, expecting those dim red eyes fixed on me with a patience older than this valley. I have seen the creature only twice since that night. Not closely, not like before, just glimpses. A silhouette perched on a high hill during a thunderstorm. A dark figure standing in the cornfield when lightning lit the sky. The moments were so brief I wondered whether they were tricks of exhaustion or tricks of memory. But each time the same silence followed me home. The same stillness that does not belong anywhere humans live. I do not know why it came to that barn. I do not know why the cattle arranged themselves in that perfect circle. And I do not know why the creature allowed me to see it in the open, standing tall on the ridge of the roof like a monument carved in shadow. But I do know this came with purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it has not ended. The valley still grows quiet when storms roll in. The animals still pause, breath held tight, waiting for something only they understand. And sometimes, when I step outside at night and stand on my porch with the wind carrying the scent of rain, I feel it again. That hum beneath the soil, that presence in the air, that gentle pressure on the world, as if the land itself is bracing. And when I see the cattle standing still, not quite a circle but close enough to remember the shape they once formed, I understand that they know the truth better than I do. They remember the creature, and the creature remembers them. I suppose that is why I am recording this. Not for the county, not for my deputies, not even for the farmer who still calls me when the nights grow too quiet. I am recording this because someone needs to know what I saw, what I felt, what still lingers in this valley. Someone needs to understand that the silence is not empty. It is a sign, a signal, a warning. And every time the world goes quiet on my patrol, every time the cattle stand and stare into a space I cannot see, every time the air grows still and heavy, I am taken back to the moment it all began. The night the farmer claimed Mothman perched on his barn. And when I got there, the cattle had circled themselves in absolute silence.